My name is Dale Solomon. Let me tell you about the twists and turns of my life. I can't say I'm ashamed or proud of anything I've done. Sometimes life itself forces you to make hard decisions. I grew up in a loving but rather strapped family. I have two older sisters and two younger brothers. I am the middle child in age. Since money was tight, I worked since I was a teenager. Although many people told me that I was a very bright boy, most of the work I did was rough and hard, but it provided me with money for my expenses. When I attended the local school, I occasionally sold my seed and blood to make ends meet. I met Celeste when I was in 10th grade, and we ran away from school after 6 weeks of almost nonstop sex. She was a very resourceful lover, with only one taboo. Her back door appeared to be padlocked. Well, no means no, and I never asked her to explain why. I worked 32 hours a week, which was just enough to get an extra allowance. Although it cost me most of my free time, I was also taking 14 credit hours of night classes. Celeste worked in the clerical office of one of the insurance offices. Even when adding up our two incomes, tuition and living expenses made it impossible for us to accumulate any savings. The only way to survive was to keep our eyes on the horizon slipping away in the distance, waiting for some lucky chance. When the lack of money began to seem a truly insurmountable obstacle, or rather, we, decided that a short stint in the Army would be good for me. The benefits mentioned in the serviceman's bill seemed like the best long-term solution. A month after I entered boot camp, Celeste informed me that she was pregnant. She also told me that her parents had agreed to help with the baby when the time was right. I was young and stupid. Yes, I know that's not an acceptable excuse, but I was so devastated at the time that it never occurred to me to check. We had been married for 2 years when Celeste gave birth to our son. If it had been a girl, she would have been named Gloria. Since it was a boy, we agreed on the name Daryl Thomas beforehand. Less than a month after the birth, I was served with divorce papers. At the time, I was still in the service, far from home. In the divorce petition, Celeste did not ask me for alimony or child support money. Attached to her petition was a copy of the birth certificate, which stated in black and white that I no longer had a son named Daryl Thomas Solomon. Instead, the document listed Celeste's co-worker, Wendell Truitt, as the child's father. Just like that, Daryl Thomas took off and disappeared, and instead, the child was henceforth named Wendell Truitt, Jr. There were no conditions for visitation stipulated in the petition because technically, I was no longer the boy's father. My battle buddies had convinced me that losing such a wife was the best possible outcome for me. It was hard to argue against that. However, try telling that to my broken heart. Since the day I was served with the divorce papers, I have not spoken to Celeste once. Don't get me wrong, it took me a long time to regain my confidence and trust in women, but eventually I succeeded. I found a woman who truly loves me, and even still, it almost didn't work out. I met Dee at one of the neighborhood barbecues. She was the sister of one of my neighbors, who I didn't know very well at the time. Although she had been to a few of these parties before, we had never spent much time together. I was too in a shell at that party, still worrying about the aftermath of the divorce, to make the first move. Dee sensed my stiffness and melted the ice by talking to me. "I heard you wore a military uniform?" she asked, casually making conversation. "Yes, ma'am. Did you?" "No, I'm quite a civilian," she smiled. "How long have you been back?" "About 9 months. Are you here alone tonight?" I asked, just in case. "And not just today, what about you?" She switched to a more informal style of communication, unnoticeably and easily. "Yes, free and carefree," I smirked, adjusting to her style of communication and feeling as if I had known her for a long time. "Just trying to be sociable. What house do you live in?" "Oh, I don't live in the neighborhood. My sister invited me here. She's over there," she said, pointing to a woman talking to someone off to the side who looked nothing like her. "Well then, what brought you here?" "You," she answered, shortly and simply, with a Mona Lisa smile and some fire in her eyes. "Well, yes, of course. Though I've seen you at a few of these gatherings before," I teased her. Oh, I see. You think you're the only one allowed to be shy? Well, nameless lady, how would you like to get out of here, have some ice cream, and go to a movie? By the way, my name is Dale, I introduced myself, making a businesslike and cultured suggestion, which, under certain conditions, could have an interesting continuation for both of us. I'd like that, Dale. How about calling me Dee? My new acquaintance suggested, sidling up to me and slipping her hand under my elbow. And just like that, we charted a course that led us to live together 8 months later. Dee was studying and preparing to take the exam to become a lawyer. I, on the other hand, after receiving my bachelor's degree, took a management position at a distribution center. We rented a house in an ordinary bedroom community. Occasionally, we would take a vacation and go to Las Vegas for the weekend. Life together seemed quite pleasant and good, although neither of us talked about marriage. I must confess I didn't pay proper attention to what happened soon after. After accepting an invitation to another neighborhood party, I was hanging around the backyard. Dee hadn't been able to take the day off this time, so I was out there alone. The only thing, or rather who, I really should have avoided was our nymphomaniac neighbor whose name was Bevan. She was a shameless flirt who loved to flirt and openly tried to get me into bed, which infuriated Dee. I don't care what you do, but God forbid I hear you spend 5 seconds alone with Bevan. Is that clear, mister? She reprimanded me, glaring angrily and pointing her finger at my chest. Yes, sir, or ma'am, or darling. Yes, sir, I understand. I saluted her. Well, I had masterfully avoided Bevan at this party. The pair of newcomers to our community who had put on this entertainment for the neighbors, Randy and Harley, were dressed rather daringly that evening. In Harley's case, that meant she showed up clearly braless, and I seriously doubted that I could see through her skirt, which, by the way, ended at mid-thigh to her panty line. She acted quite relaxed, occasionally pressing her impressive breasts against everyone present, men and women alike. At the same time, Randy didn't seem at all bothered by his wife's provocative behavior. After some time had passed, the party seemed to be winding down, as several of the men in the backyard were long gone. I decided that I had spent enough time to satisfy the polite visitor requirements of such events. Randy was just guiding one of the remaining guys into the house when I patted him on the shoulder to say goodbye to him. He turned around. Are you sure you want to leave already, Dale? Things get pretty exciting out there in the bedroom. If you know what I mean. He smirked and winked at me meaningfully. Yeah, I'm sure you do. Welcome to the neighborhood. Say hi to Harley, I replied. Well, come on then. Follow me through the house. You can go out the front door. I followed Randy, and as I passed one of the rooms, I heard sex sounds that couldn't be confused with anything else. Randy was grinning from ear to ear. We passed close enough to a half-open door behind which I caught a glimpse of a group of standing naked men. Even in the hallway, I could hear the sharp exhalations and spankings and Harley's moans as if she were a first-class whore from a porn movie. I just smiled and continued walking towards the exit of the house. If only I'd known where this was going, I could have been better prepared for the storm of shit that was going to rain down on my head later that night. You miserable bastard! How could you? Came a scream from an enraged Dee who stormed into the house in a whirlwind. How could I what? Have sex with our new neighbor? Bevan said every man who was at their party jumped on top of her. Not true. I avoided Bevan at all costs and never saw Harley again after the first hour or so, although I did hear her when I left. Ask Randy. I had no part in any of this. That's not what Bevan said. She admitted to me that you came out of Randy's bedroom with a wide and beaming smile on your lying face. Cut the shit! Take your shit and go to the guest bedroom. You are not sleeping with me tonight, do you understand? She raged. That night was the beginning of the end. Things never went back to normal after that. I later learned that Randy and Harley were swingers, and that day they were recruiting new friends into their circle by offering treats of free samples. After 2 months of living in the same shared house but alone, I warned Dee that things better get better or I would move out. In retrospect, I can say that if we were ultimately headed for a breakup, it was the perfect time for it at that point. We had discussed getting married and starting a real family several times before that, but never got any further than talking, especially since the lack of children was drawing a line under our relationship. The only thing that really shocked me was how quickly Dee's love turned into hatred based solely on the words of a person she had, in her own words, always despised. If Dee was such a mentally unstable person, then perhaps I should have thanked my lucky star that we broke up exactly when we did. Although, try telling that to my aching, unfulfilled heart. Eventually, I found another apartment and moved out. Somehow, I wasn't shocked at all when, shortly after, Bevan left a message on my cell phone asking if I wanted to meet up with her. I never called her back, except there was still a manipulative nymphomaniac in my life. I had been single for almost a year when my heart got an unwanted jolt. In the intervening time, I never bothered to delete Dee's contact information from my cell phone. So when it buzzed one Saturday night and Dee's number popped up on the screen, I didn't know what to do. My stomach suddenly constricted, my heart sped up, and my palms sweated. What the hell did she want? The easiest thing to do was send a text, and after a long, unsuccessful trill, the phone went silent for a moment, then jingled briefly, notifying me of its arrival. "Hey, Dale. I was wondering if you wanted to get together sometime. I owe you an apology and would like to do it in person," I read the text from Dee. Oh man, I was done with her and trying to move on with my life. Why should I now give her the opportunity to clear my conscience? Yes, I still had strong feelings for her, but with some sixth sense, I knew it was best not to rekindle this relationship. So I said, "Thank you, no," which prompted an immediate question. Why? I could have said, "Because I hate you." I could have said, "You're not worth my time." I also could have written, "Because you're crazy." Instead of all that, I didn't say anything back to her. Waking up Sunday morning, I found a series of new text messages from Dee. Since I didn't want to go out with her, she was apparently going to lay out everything she knew and wanted to tell me in a bunch of text messages, so they poured onto my phone one after another. Apparently, Randy and Harley had videotaped that unbridled session of theirs in the bedroom, as well as what was on offer. Someone's divorce lawyer got wind of it and sued. The video analysis presented in court in the case detailed who was involved in the act. As I emphasized on that fateful day, I was not one of the actors in their swinger party. Wow, here was then she believed me and regretted what she had said and done. Even though I hadn't followed up with her since our breakup, I decided to give Dee a taste of some of her own bitter medicine. I wrote, "It doesn't matter now. From what I hear, after I left, you became one of the easiest assholes around. I know I could never live with a woman of that behavior. Have a nice life, Dee." Almost instantly, the phone rang. "Dale, that's not true. Who did you hear that from? I am not a whore." Let her piss off. Maybe it would be good for her. I didn't say anything back. Unsurprisingly, my phone started ringing after a few minutes, and I finally turned it off. Talk about hitting a nerve. Maybe I should have kept statistics. After my comment about her windiness, a barrage of several dozen texts and voicemails rained down on my cell phone, all unanswered, of course. She was desperate to protect her reputation. How could I allow even the tiniest thought that this was true? The flood of messages and calls didn't stop until 2 weeks later. The last one went something like this. "I'm sorry. I get it. I made a wild accusation that you couldn't defend. I finally realized that you did the exact same thing to me. I threw a good man out and now I regret it. I'll leave you alone. But I still love you. D." A week later, I decided to meet up with Dee for a drink or two. Why? I had a hard time explaining it even to myself. Probably her last text message had gradually melted my earlier resolve not to communicate with her again. Part of me was screaming, "Run!" But the idiot in charge assured me he had everything under control. Dee showed up for our meeting fully armed. While we were together, she had always dressed conservatively, but now a push-up bra and a low-cut blouse effectively emphasized her lush breasts. I think she had deliberately chosen this bra so that she could see the areolae partially peeking out of it. It was equally hard to ignore her hardened breasts sticking out through the fabric of the blouse like bullets. "Dale, my eyes are up here," she said with a smirk on her face. "And they're very sexy too, Dee," I replied, with difficulty tearing my gaze away and raising my eyes upward. You went to all this trouble to get me to see these beauties, so it would be rude of me to ignore them. How are you doing? Full of optimism. And you? Too soon to tell. What can I get you to drink? White wine. That hasn't changed. Don't you think this skirt is a little too short? She asked, as if casually stroking her thighs. You'd think she kept her legs together. Not when all her available arsenal of flesh was making a persistent assault on my hormones. The sight of any woman's exposed inner thigh arouses any man, unless he's a eunuch. It might not be appropriate for a church, but it's perfect for a bar like this. Do you come here often? I asked. First time. I was hoping to find someone like you. What about you? You're probably a regular here. Yeah, it's my favorite place to pick up girls. There's usually a wide variety of them, I said in a casual tone. It made Dee flinch. I noticed it, though, and smirked back. Touché, as the French say. I have some reason to believe that you're the kind of guy who's loyal to the extreme, she said with some sadness in her voice. So I think it's worth asking. I'm not interfering with your current girlfriend, am I? Didn't I mention that part of my inner self kept saying, run? After our breakup, I admittedly had the temporary pleasure of a few casual one-night stands, and I was in no way ready for another long-term relationship, much less one with Dee. Now I've decided that honesty is the best policy. No. At this point, my heart didn't trust any woman. It might be months or even years before I have the courage to put myself through that kind of pain again. At those words, Dee's eyes clouded with sadness. I'm so sorry, Dale. Can I interest you in a friends with benefits offer? So you don't forget about me. I guess she realized she had me in her sights. I need to buy condoms first, I mumbled. She flinched again and started up again. But you don't need... And then, shaking her head. Okay. Your place or mine? She asked, lowering her voice and leaning across the table toward me. Let's go to your place. That way I can leave when I need to. I paid the bill and ran like the wind to the drugstore. My feet must have flashed through the air like those cartoon characters. When I got back and Dee let me in, she was already dressed in a short, cute robe. As soon as I pulled my coat off my shoulders, she swung open the halves of her robe like a magician, which, of course, had nothing on underneath, and I almost went blind. Her naked, tanned figure was as alluring and arousing as I remembered it. I'm your sex toy tonight, Dale. Tell me what you want and I'll do it, she moaned in a lust-altered, low, chesty voice. Dee was everything a man could dream of. Sensual, passionate, attentive, and patient. But that wasn't enough. I used her charms at least twice a week. Dee, I know what you want. For us to get back together. I'm sorry. What we had before doesn't work for me anymore, I confided to her. Maybe I need help figuring out why I've become so emotionally detached, and I don't want to mislead you. The sex is great, your attitude is great, but I just can't seem to recapture the love that I used to have. Dale, I've noticed that, she replied with a sigh. You're not the same person I used to know. I'm willing to give you more time to find yourself. I still blame myself for doing that to you. I stopped calling her, but Dee didn't. She wouldn't stop keeping me in the loop about her life. Even though I refused, she continued to periodically offer to let me stay the night at her place. The problem was, it wasn't just Dee I wasn't interested in. I had come to terms with the fact that I needed professional help to get rid of the depression that had come over me. Dave, my counseling psychologist, was making good progress, and he convinced me to invite Dee to join us for a few sessions. During these, he was not courteously gentle with her, persistently getting to the heart of the problems and contradictions that existed between us. The realization that Dee had never really trusted me made her return home in tears. As a result, she took it a step further and began to conduct her own private counseling sessions. Gradually, in small steps, we resumed our friends with benefits meetings, and I began to think that in time we might progress to the point where we could resume a serious relationship again. I had been divorced from Celeste for 5 years when one day she suddenly left a message for me at my parents' house. I waited a few days before calling her back. I had absolutely no reason to talk to her again, but natural curiosity took over. Celeste, it's Dale. You called me. Thanks for calling me back. My ex-wife's voice sounded half forgotten but familiar. Wendell and I need to talk to you about something very important, and we were wondering if we could get together. We could buy you dinner, if you'd like. I agreed to meet at a cafe near the house where I live. Dee decided to join me. Celeste was accompanied by a man she introduced as her husband, Wendell. She was quite stylishly dressed, not bad-looking, and quite sociable. After the waitress took our orders and left, Celeste glanced at her husband, as if gathering her resolve for a challenge, then took out an envelope and placed it on the table in front of her. Dale, I have one confession to make, and then I have a favor to ask of you. When I had the baby, well, you and I were still married at the time. Well, I named Wendell as the father, but, we recently discovered that that's not true. Anyway, Dale, you're his father. Dee squeezed my hand painfully. My heart sped up, and I felt my stomach clench. You don't have anything to say about this? Celeste frowned, watching my reaction carefully. What's your request, whore? I snapped out of it. Wendell Jr. needs a bone marrow donor, and I was hoping you'd agree to do it for him. I have here. She placed her hand on top of an envelope lying on the table. I have a DNA test that shows that Wendell is not the boy's father. The only other person who could be his father is you. The DNA test and the doctor's report on Wendell Jr. are in this envelope. You will need to be tested to see if you are compatible. But since I am not suitable for donation, the doctors said you are almost certainly compatible with your own son. I've been donating my seed to the bank long before we met, I objected. I could have several, maybe even dozens of children I've conceived but never met in my life. What makes you think your child is more deserving of my time and a piece of my body than they are? Unlike the others, he was conceived naturally. Doesn't that mean anything? She pressed. Not to me. Your child, in my opinion, is no different from any others I may have once conceived. I have absolutely no emotional attachment to any of them. If that's what the cheating, lying whore gave birth to, then so be it. If that's all you've got, then I've got to get back to work. Please don't call my wife names, the weasel sitting across the table interjected. Celeste squeezed his hand. Ignore him, Wendell. If that's the way he wants to talk, well, but we mustn't stoop to his level. Celeste, with a blotchy face, was practically screaming by now. Fuck you, bitch! Dale, how can you turn your back on your son in cold blood? I'll tell you what, whore. I cut her off. I'm going to find out if there's a way to see if any of my possible but as yet unknown children are sick. If there is, and his mother is not a lying whore, then I will help that child. How about that? I got up from my seat, signaling that the conversation was over, lifted Dee to her feet, and headed for the door. No sooner had we taken a few steps than Wendell spoke, unlike Celeste, in a conciliatory and pleading tone. Dale, we need your help. Talk to us. What would it take? Stopping and turning around, I presented my terms. Correct my son's birth certificate to list me as his father and then change his name to Daryl Thomas Solomon. If you do that, then I'll see if I'm compatible with him. Until you do, don't even think about bothering me again. After that, Dee and I walked out of there, even though they begged me to stay and talk to them. Dee wasn't sure how to melt the ice. What are you thinking, Dale? I'm thinking you're a much nicer and kinder woman than that bitch. Are you going to help the boy? His name is Daryl. You can't seem to trust me completely, can you? Yeah, I'm sorry. If I trust you, will you marry me? This case could get ugly, you know. I asked you a question. I've been contemplating my life prospects for some time. Together, Dee and I had made a lot of progress in therapy, and I really loved her. So what the hell? Yes, I'll marry you if you help me with this case, I finally answered, and her face brightened. Can you get me a new birth certificate and name change papers? Oh, yes. I'd be happy to help you. The no-holds-barred sex that reigned in our bedroom that night was the best Dee and I had ever had together. The next day, I was swamped with some errands, but Dee delivered the already drafted documents by courier. The instructions for Celeste and Wendell stated that they were to draw up the paperwork with a notary and then call us to set up the next appointment. Also included was a DNA testing kit so I could see if Daryl was really my child. It was another day before we met up with them again. "It's nice to have you join us today. Did you bring the paperwork as agreed?" Dee asked in a very professional manner. "Yes, it's all here in the envelope. And here's a DNA swab from from Daryl?" Celeste hesitated for a second and quickly corrected herself. I immediately intervened. "We're not filing those papers until all the medical procedures are complete. By the way, I have a list of questions for both of you to answer. We need to determine how medical expenses will be paid. I understand you also have a 2-year-old daughter?" "Yes. Audrey celebrated her 2nd birthday last month. When will you be tested, Dale?" "As soon as my counselor tells me it's okay." The other night, I gave Dee detailed instructions on how to prepare the paperwork. "It goes against my better judgment," Dee told me with some hesitation, "but I trust you, Dale. For our sake, I hope that whatever you have in mind is not only legal, but that it succeeds. I told you how much I love you, didn't I? Pretty soon you'll love me as much as I love you." "Oh, you're dreaming. You'll never catch up with me on that, mister," laughed Dee. Another day passed, and we were all gathered around the conference table again. "Thank you for joining us. I'm not too sure I want to help you, though." I began the dialogue with a slight frown. "Dale, please don't say things like that," Celeste sobbed pleadingly. "The boy really needs your help as his condition has started to deteriorate." "Does Daryl like his sister Audrey?" I asked a question they hadn't expected. Yes," she answered with a sniffle. "Does Audrey like her brother Daryl?" "Yes, but why?" "It would be a shame to separate them," I interrupted her question. "If you want me to authorize the bone marrow transplant, then you have to give me full custody of both children. I think it would be too hard to separate a brother and sister." Wendell and Celeste at the other end of the table turned into pillars of salt, eyes bulging and mouths agape. "And I don't think it would be a good idea for you to have visitation rights with the children for the next 2 years. Let them get used to their new parents first," I added. Wendell was the first to unfreeze. His face contorted, and jumping up from his seat, he shouted, "What the hell? There's no way I'm letting you steal my daughter!" "Sorry, Polecat, but you stole my baby first. What's the difference then?" I shrugged. I didn't steal it. Celeste told me I was his father." "That's a twist, isn't it? To think the cheating whore lied to you. What a surprise. Tell me, did you know she was married when you started having her?" Wendell didn't answer, but precipitated backward, plopping back in his chair and looking somewhere off to the side. Come on, asshole, answer the fucking question." "Yes," he struggled to get it out. "Uh-huh, I see. I guess it's okay for you to steal another man's wife. That's quite a moral code you've got there. Congratulations, you two are perfect for each other," I said, my lips curving into an ironic grin. Then I slammed my palm down on the table. "Okay, you want me to help you? Then register the kids, both kids, in my name. Dee's already got all the paperwork ready for that." Celeste was sniffling, barely holding back her sobs. "Dale, how can you be so heartless?" "Look in the mirror, whore," I said. "In it you'll see heartlessness itself staring back at you. Anyway, I won't say it again. Bring the paperwork and bring the kids when you're ready to talk." Wendell and Celeste sobbed, tucked into each other's shoulders as Dee and I left the room. After that meeting, Dee was very quiet, and I would occasionally catch the worried looks she cast at me. What she had seen and heard at the talks had really disturbed her. "You know, Dale, there's a side of you I never knew existed. It sounds like there's a lot of repressed anger sitting inside of you," she told me. Dee was probably right. I felt like something was building up inside of me, looking for a way out. When I started to speak, my voice was soft, but after only a few minutes I was almost shouting. "What makes you feel that way? I fell in love, then I got married, and then I started serving my country so that my family could have a better life. I was doing what a husband and head of a family is supposed to do. And what happened? Someone took me and just ripped my heart out. You can understand how I felt then, can't you? Oh, wait a minute. No, Dee, you can't. Because even later, when I was with you, I acted as responsibly as I should have. But was that enough for you? Now I'm being told I have a son who was stolen from me. Has something like this happened in your life too? I don't think so. Maybe you're right. I'm overreacting. What am I thinking right now? Let me take a deep breath and stop acting so childish. Here's what I'm thinking. Maybe I rushed into this. Maybe it's not such a good idea for us to get married. I was about to get up with the intention of leaving when Dee jumped on me. She was as loud and furious in her speech as I was. Sit down right now. You're not going anywhere. That's it. Look, I'm so sorry. I was trying to make it up to you. I screwed up. I know that. You know it. And I didn't doubt you. I was just trying to get you to talk to me. I think I succeeded. Maybe now you can calm down a little bit. I hope so. Yeah, you're right. Celeste fucked you up big time. And then I added my own shit. I'm sorry about that again. I agreed to trust you on this DNA thing, but you have an advantage over me. Honestly, I have no idea where this is going, and what the hell are we going to do with 2 kids? She exclaimed, clutching her head. So forgive me if I seem overly concerned, but until you tell me what your plans are, I think I have a right to be nervous. We both had tears glistening in our eyes by this point. I swallowed the lump lodged in my throat and replied, I'm sorry, what you said. I admit it's fair. Now grab your pencil and notepad and let me tell you what I hope will happen soon. I outlined my next request to Dee. Hearing my plan, she immediately perked up. Result? That night, we repeatedly tried to outdo ourselves in bed. In preparation for another encounter, I really wasn't sure if Celeste and Wendell would capitulate after all. But it was only 2 days before the kids were delivered to Dee. I've never seen 2 adults cry so hard. Dee and I took the children to the mall cafeteria and waited. After about 15 minutes, I was informed that Celeste had headed to the underground parking lot. We intercepted them there, already getting into the car, leading the kids behind them. Audrey ran up on her short, scurrying legs to Celeste and Wendell, squealing joyfully to greet them like long-lost friends. They were both completely confused, looking as if they had aged a dozen years at once. What? Dale, I thought you didn't want us to see them for 2 years. Stammering, Celeste asked me, red-eyed and shoulders slumped, still automatically cradling baby Audrey in her arms. I never intended to file for custody. I wanted you to prove how much you love your children, I replied. The papers are drawn up so that I can file them in court at any time right up until their 18th birthdays. If I ever find out that these children have ever been mistreated and abused, I will come to court to take them away from you, I promised sternly. But Dale, are you still going to get that physical? She asked with a flicker of hope. No, I got tested the day after we first met. I'm as incompatible with Daryl as it's possible to be. My mismatched blood type immediately disqualified me from being a donor for the boy. It also proves that I'm not the father of your son. Now that's a surprise, isn't it, Ferret? I tossed to Wendell, who stood frozen at the news like a deer in headlights. And as for you, Celeste, you really have been a whore all this time, haven't you? Wendell looked shocked and confused. Celeste, on the other hand, screamed, That can't be! So you're a medical expert now, too? I ironically teased her. I suggest you track down his real father, or hope like hell that someone suitable shows up on the donor registry. Epilogue, due to privacy laws, I never found out who saved Wendell, Jr. All I know is that he spent 11 weeks in the hospital before being released to go home with Celeste and nominal daddy Wendell. Dee kept in touch with them as she wanted everything to have a happy ending. I kept my promise and proposed to Dee. Well, mostly me, we still had some issues to work out. Dave, our personal counselor, has spent more than 1 session helping me overcome my issues with contained anger. He's also helping Dee accept me for who I am. Dee and I already have 2 girls. Celeste and Wendell tried a couple more times to have a Wendell Jr. of their own. Alas, it didn't work. Or rather, it did work, but not the way they wanted it to. Wendell Jr. now has 3 sisters. There couldn't have been a better pair of twins. As for my supposed children, for whom I once sacrificed my squeeze, I have yet to track down any of them, if they even exist. With all these websites on finding people by DNA, I think it's only a matter of time before they are discovered. If they ever need me, I'll do whatever it takes, but probably without all the fuss this time. Dee and I fed all the documents we got from Celeste to the paper shredder. And yes, I know I may have acted like a real ass, however, I think I had every right to.